Hey everyone, in this video I want to look at the key rotation policy capability we have in Azure Key Vault. So if we take a step back, if we look at the Azure Key Vault service, we have our Azure Key Vault, it supports a number of different types of object. We use the idea of, well, we can have secrets. And of course, with secrets, we can both write and read them. So I can put a value in and get the value back out. I can have certificates. And this is all about the handling of the lifecycle management, the distribution. And of course, we can have keys. Now with keys, we can import them. We can generate them. We can run cryptographic operations with them inside the Key Vault, but we can't just bring them out. Yes, there's replication capabilities, there's backup restore capabilities within the same security realm, but I can't just go and grab the key. The point is the key lives in the Key Vault and I use it for certain types of cryptographic operation. Now, if I think about these keys for a second, let's just say we have a key called, we'll say key 1. Now that key has various attributes. In the role-based access control model of the Key Vault, as opposed to the old access policy model where, hey, there was one set of permissions that applied to everything of a certain type within the Key Vault, in the role-based access control model, which is really the one we would want to use, every object now has its own role-based access control. So I could say, hey, for this particular key or for this particular secret, these particular set of service principals, these identities, have these sets of permissions. But I could have a completely different set of permissions on different keys, different secrets, different certificates. So that's a huge key benefit. So we have the idea of, well, hey, I have role-based access control. And then for every key, there's going to be at least one version. So I could think, okay, I have my V1 version of the key. And then I might have a certain service. So I might think about, well, I've got a resource over here that is using that key. Now, a very popular use of keys, and there's many others as well, but if I talk about encryption at rest, and I talk about a bring your own key, a customer managed key, the way that works is it's a key in my Key Vault. So this resource is using a certain version of the key. An example would be, again, that customer managed key, but it doesn't have to be. Now, we shouldn't just create a key and then forget about it. There's a whole idea about rotating keys periodically. And that rotation means we create a new version of that key. So if that was the V1, well, at a certain amount of time, we would go and create a V2. And what we'd want to do is services, hey, stop using the V1. I now want you to use that V2 version. And so when we create this new version of the key, we call this a key rotation. And there's different guidelines depending on the sensitivity of how this key is used, but we would really think about that key rotation happening a minimum of every 2 years. I don't want a key sitting around longer than that. There's certain ideas that will give it enough time, I might be able to break a key or it gets leaked. So it's better to rotate, get a new version of that key for what we want to do. So I can manually do this. If I was to jump over to the portal for a second. So here in the portal, so I am using the role-based access mode. If I was to go and look at a certain key, I'll look at, let's say, storage 3. And I can already see there's two versions. I have an older version of the key, and I have a newer version, and this is the current version. Now, at any time, I could say, hey, I want a new version, and I'm telling it to generate, but I could also import or restore a backup. I give it the parameters of that key, and I can also here, you'll see things like optional activation date and expiration date. And if I was to say, yes, I want an expiration date, by default, it's putting it in for 2 years' time. So I'm going to say, great, let's go and create that version. And we can now see, okay, this current version is this new version of the key. If I refresh, tidy this up, Now that current version before has now become an older version of the key. It still exists, so it's still there because I shouldn't just delete it. Because if we think of the order of operations, hey, I've got something using a version of the key. It's been about that amount of time. I want to create a new version of the key. But if I just deleted this, well, these resources don't start switching. It's possible to use the new version of the key. Either I have to perform some manual action. So I have to actually go to the service and say, hey, I now want you to use this version of the key, or maybe it supports an auto key rotation. Now, I want to be careful with the terminology here because this is different than this key rotationing happening over here. Auto key rotation on the resource means it's going to check periodically and see, well, is there a new version of the key? If there is a new version of the key, then it will switch and start using it without me having to do the manual action. So when I talk about an auto key rotation on the resource, it is not rotating the key. It is, hey, it's going to go and check, is there a new version of the key? And if there is, it will go and start using it. And the key part of those resources is when we configure them, we don't point to a particular version of the key. We just point to the key itself, and then it will go and use whichever the most recent version of that key is. But I want to pay attention to those two options we had for that key. So when I created it, you would have noticed there were some optional things I could configure. One was an activation, date and time. I'm just going to write date, i.e. when it would start to become active and would start to be usable. And there was also the idea of an expiration date and time, i.e. once that passes, I can't use it anymore. And both of these were optional. I didn't have to use these, but in my case, when I generated the new key, I did put an expiration date of 2 years in the future. And we'll see why I did that later on, but it is a really good idea so that I don't just have these keys left around forever. But if I just expired the key and I didn't have a good process, if I just left it, then in 2 years' time, the services would just stop working because their key isn't available anymore. Now, if I went and looked at an example service, for example, let's look at a storage account, which is just one example. Pretty much every service that does some kind of encryption at rest, storage account, SQL Server with its transparent data encryption, open source databases, you name it, if there's some kind of encryption at rest, most of the times now they will support bring your own key. So if I look at the encryption, I have changed it. So instead of being a Microsoft managed key, I have changed it to a customer managed key. But you'll notice the key I'm pointing at is just the key. It is not a specific version of the key. And we can see, well, we have turned on automated key rotation. So it's just going to use the latest version. Now, in a storage account world, what it's going to do is I think every 24 hours, it's going to go and look and say, hey, is there a new version of the key? And if there is, it will go and start using it. Now, it's not actually using that key to encrypt the data on the disk. There is a data encryption key that's used to actually encrypt the bits on disk. And then a key encryption key that's used to encrypt that data encryption key to get access to it. And that's the key we are changing. Otherwise, we'd have to re-encrypt the data every time we rotated the key. So it doesn't do that. There's different data encryption keys. And again, different technologies work differently. But by and large, this is the key encryption key that we are rotating here. And you would have noticed, obviously, the resource has to have permission to read the key. So on the actual key, there's a particular Key Vault crypto service encryption user that the identity of the resource, that managed identity, would have to have permissions to. If I'm asking the resource to actually create the managed identity, then it would need that permission at the Key Vault level instead of just at the basic key level. So I want to look at my service and say, hey, does it support this automatic key rotation? If it does, fantastic. Now, another thing that happens here is Key Vault integrates with Event Grid. And the whole point of Event Grid if there's some event happening, it can go and trigger an event handler. That could be an Azure function, a logic app, a webhook, a RESTful API, an Azure automation that could then say, hey, look, they've generated a new key. I should go and, because I've been triggered by Event Grid, I'm some kind of serverless technology, I need to go and do something. So I could write something, if it didn't support auto key rotation, to then go and, hey, when I see a new key is generated by Event Grid, I go and say, okay, now go and use this new version. But more and more of them today do support that auto key rotation. So, hey, when I create a new version, it's just going to go and start using it within some period of time. Now, because it is some period of time, and I can configure both an activation date and I have this idea of an expiration date, you do need to be careful that there is some overlap between those times. So for example, if I had the V1 key, well, that V1 key is valid for some period of time. And then maybe that's the expiration time here. So that's my V1. My V2, I cannot have start here because there's no overlap. There's no time for the service to detect, hey, there's a new version. I could start using it. Things would break. So I need some overlap in my timing to make sure this is successful. So this is my V2. Maybe that's an activation time, or maybe it's just that's the time it's created and it's active as soon as it's created. But the key point here is I do have this overlap. And this overlap, I need to pick that time based on how quickly can I update the services to start seeing there's a new version and start using the new version. If it was storage, for example, maybe I'd set it to a minimum of 48-hour window. It should detect it in 24 hours. I want a little bit of wiggle room in there. Maybe that overlap would be a 48-hour window, but it's super important that I have that overlap between them. And again, this is all about it's either create for that V2 or it's activation time. So I have that overlap there. So now, okay, great. I can manually do that rotation. But that's some work on me that I have to remember. I have to set something in my calendar. Hey, go and rotate the keys. So while I can manually go and do that, I don't have to. There's now this idea of an auto rotation policy. So if I had these various attributes of the key, another nice thing I can now do is I can configure, and it's optional, but I can turn on a key rotation policy. And I'm doing this at a per key level. So my key rotation policy, let's kind of expand that out, has a number of different attributes to it. Optionally, I can configure an expiry time. And that's going to be a certain time period. So let's actually look at this as we go through and create this. So if I go back and look at my key again, so let's go and look at my key vault, and then we'll look at a certain key, and we'll take storage 2. Actually, let's look at storage 3, maybe that's more interesting. Storage 3, we have 3 versions. I can look here at rotation policy. So I'm going to turn this on. Notice my first option, I could set an expiry time in days, months, or years. So maybe I'd say, hey, look, I want this to expire in 2 years' time. Before I fill that in though, if I turn on auto rotation, right now notice this second option is grayed out. Automatically renew at a given time before expiry. It's not available to me. Now remember, the current version of the key has an expiration date. So this is required for some of the later options in this key rotation. If it didn't have an expiration date, some of them will stay grayed out. If I go back to my rotation policy, because the current key has an expiry time, and I'm going to add this optional thing, and I enable the policy, now this second option is available to me, as is the notification option. So these two things, this idea of renew at a time before expiry and the notification time before expiry are only going to be available, this is an important part, if I have configured an expiry time option in the rule, in the policy, and the current key has an expiration date. Those two things, the policy has to have an expiry time and the current key has to have an expiry time, that's going to open up two of our configuration options. So then we saw, well, we had two options. So one of my options, option one, was rotate after a certain time period after the current one was created. So hey, create it, a new one 2 years after the current version was created. Or I can say rotate before the current one expires. And then I put in some time unit for both of those in days, months, years. So I have to pick, it's one of these two. But for this one to show up, remember, for this to be available, this has to be populated in the rule and my current key has to be populated. So both of those have to be there. So this is an and. I need both an expiry time in the rule and my current key has an expiry time. Then I would get the option to rotate before expiry, which makes sense. If there's not an expiry time, how can I possibly rotate before the expiry time? So I need the current key to have an expiry time and I need my rule to create an expiry time on the next key so I can always create before the expiry. So if we go and look at our option, hey, I can pick either one of these. So automatically renew at a given time after the creation or automatically renew at a given time before the expiry. And then I set some value. So if I'm doing renew at a given time before expiry, I might say renew 3 months before the expiry. So that is my time, and that time I set for both of them, either time after creation or time before expiry. And then I have this notification option. And what the notification option is, again, this is only available if those things are true, which again makes total sense. So I have the time, and then I have this optional, hey, I can notify before expiry time. And once again, it makes total sense. This is only available if both those things are true as well. My policy is going to set an expiration time. The current key has an expiration time. And again, I can set that to days, months, years. And what this would trigger, this will actually go and trigger event grid. So this will create an event in event grid, which I could then have some event handler, a function, a logic app, an automation, a webhook that could go and do something. So it's a way for me to know in advance, hey, maybe I create the new one 3 months before, and then a month before, maybe I want to go and switch to it. So I could write something if my service didn't support automatic key rotation, and I have to manually go and switch it, or not manually, I write something to go and do the switch for me. So that is what that option is going to do. It's going to go and trigger an event grid event. So then what I've configured for Azure Key Vault event expiry time, it could go and call a function that could then go and do some action for me. And that's it. That's the rule. So I would go and create the rule. I would configure and put in all those values. And then I would hit save. So from here, I just hit save. And that's been updated. So now it's going to be valid for 2 years when it creates a new key. It's going to create the new one 3 months before the current one expires. And then 30 days before it expires, it will actually go and generate an event for event grid. And the whole point of event grid, again, is rather than me writing something that has to hammer poll the source, hey, do you have an event? Do you have an event? Do you have an event? Event Grid will call that technology and say, hey, there's an event for you. Here you go. Go and do your thing. Run your serverless technology. Do whatever I want. And so that's the point of a key rotation policy. When I combine it with the ability to have auto key rotation on the service, I can be completely hands-off. Hey, I turn on the auto key rotation on the service. I make sure the service is pointing to the key, not a specific version. And then on the Key Vault, I set up the policy to automatically rotate the keys. I'm done. I'm in a really good place. Now, there is a Azure policy that can help me check expiry dates have been set. So if I go and search for policy, for example, and I look at my definitions, and what I want to look for here is an actual policy, not an initiative, just around the Azure Key Vault category. Let's hope this wakes up in a second. I'm kind of giving up a little bit because it seems to be having a lot of performance problems this morning. So if we just search for Key Vault, and then if I just search for expire, you can configure policies in an audit mode. So for example, a Key Vault key should have an expiration date. So this would help me at least see if, hey, there are keys in the system that don't expire, which then has the risk in my environment that it's left around for a really long time, which is not a good thing. I don't want to be able to do that. So at least use the policy. It's not going to go and configure the rule for me, but it would tell me I have keys that need some attention and that potentially could just be left waiting around. And that was it. If you look at the documentation, which is linked in the description of the video, there are PowerShell commands, CLI commands, templates to go and configure these things. So I don't have to do it manually. I can do it en masse. But put these together with the resource auto key rotation to go and see there's a new version and use it. And then the policy to create automatically a new version, I really can just be completely hands off. So I hope that was useful. Until next video, take care.